Hey everyone, welcome back to another video, and in this video I'm going to show you the report like the following one, wherein if I put a selection over the slicer, I want that selection to be get removed from the matrix visual that I have on the left side. So if I select a few more brands, you can see that those brands gets removed from the matrix. So what is so special about this report? So first of all, we need to understand that to be able to create a report like the following one, we need a disconnected table that doesn't have any data lineage with the model. So what I have done is I have created a separate table wherein I have extracted the brands from the products table using the distinct function. So I have used distinct products brand to get the unique list of brands, and then I have used that column in the slicer so that I can filter out the result of my matrix. So let's get started, and I will show you how we can create a measure like the following one. So I can create a new measure, and let's name it something like sales except selected brands, and I can give it a name as 2. So the first thing that we need to do is get the list of all those brands that have been selected in that slicer, and for that let's create a variable, and I'm going to name it as selected brands, and that would be basically equal to all selected distinct brands brand, and that would retrieve all those values that have been selected in that slicer. Now what can we do? So let's extract all the brands that exist in the products table. So for that I can name the variable as all brands, and that would be basically an all products brand. The next thing to do is remove all the selected brands from the all brands variable that we have, and for that we can use the function except, which simply does a set operation and removes the second table from the first table that we supply inside that. And I can name this variable as exclude selected brand, and let's write except all brands and then selected brands. So let's see how many brands this variable is going to return. So let's write return count rows exclude selected brand, and let's click enter. Let me just drag this measure in the matrix. So at the moment I get 8 brands. So there are 11 different brands in the products table, out of which I have removed the 3 brands. That's why I get the 8 brands. And let's continue and write a few more lines of code. And the next thing that we need to write is result. This would be the final variable. That would be basically calculate over total sales. And then I need to inject all those brands that I have received from the except function, and I can simply write exclude selected brand. So this variable contains certain list of brands that exist in the products table, and once these brands are applied to the filter context, in that filter context calculate is going to evaluate the total sales measure. So let's try to return the result and see what it gets. So you can see that for each brand or each row, each cell of that visual we are getting the same amount, which is the grand total of all the brands that are except the selected brands. So how can we make the result of the second measure equal to the first measure? So at the moment what calculate is doing is it is overwriting the filter context. So when we are at Fabricam, the initial filter context is Fabricam, but once we inject the filters using the except variable, exclude variable, what it does is it is replacing the initial filter of Fabricam with the 8 brands that are included in that variable. So how can we create an intersection between the filter context that exists outside of calculate and the one that is being created by the calculate? And for that we can use keep filters. And what keep filters basically does is it does a set on intersection. So it will basically merge all the filters. So in case if the Fabricam is included in the initial filter context and in the excluded select brand variable, then only we will get the sales amount for Fabricam. But if in case Fabricam is not included in the variable that we have, we will not get anything and we will get a blank. So let's confirm this measure, and you can see that now we have received the sales amount for each variable that so for each brand that we have on the matrix. Now let's try to see if that is working or not. So if I select few more brands from the slicer, you can see that the result is being filtered out. Let's try to understand why we need a disconnected table in this model. And for that, let's head over to the View tab, then Performance Analyzer, and let's start recording. And let's copy the code that has been generated by Power BI for populating the data points of this visual. And let's go to the DAX Studio and wait for it to open. And if I paste the code here, you can see that the first variable that we get is basically DS0 filter table, which contains the list of brands. These brands are basically the brands that I have selected in the slicer. And the second variable comprises of summarize columns, and wherein summarize column is using the products brand for the grouping, which basically creates our initial filter context. And then we have the filter coming from the slicer, and then we have two measures that we are using to create the report. So when we use the disconnected table, what happens is that the disconnected table isn't able to filter out the products brand, which basically is the axis of our matrix, and this is the reason why we are able to get the report with a disconnected table. But if in case if we use the brands column from the products table, what would happen is that if I make a selection over the slicer on the brands table, and if that brand is, let's say, Contoso, the only brand that would be visible in the matrix would be of Contoso, and before the measure actually kicks in, the axis of our matrix would have been filtered. So in order to create a report like the following one, what we need is to create a disconnected table that doesn't have the data lineage with the column that we are using for the grouping. That's why I've created a disconnected table. So now what we can do is, if I clear the filters from the slicer that I have, what I want to do is at least show something to the user. So in this case, I'm going to show the brand that has the highest sale. So let's go to the measure and start editing it. And what I can do is, first of all, let's try to identify that if there is a selection over the slicer, then only we want this part of the code. If there is no selection over the slicer, we want the brand with the maximum sale. And for that, we can do is we can wrap our existing code inside if is filtered. I can write this brand. So is filtered would basically check that if there is at least one selection over the, or you can say if at least one value of that column is getting filtered, then is filtered would return true. So if that is true, I want the code which we have already tested and evaluated. Otherwise, what I want is that I want to create another variable which would be basically var all brands equal to all products brand, and then what I want is another variable var I can write brand with highest sales, and that would be basically a max x over all brands. And in the row context, I'm going to call my total sales measure, so that would list out only single brand that has the highest sales amount amongst the all brands that I have in the products table. So the next thing that I need to do is just simply return the result, and what I can do is so before that I need to create another variable which I can name it as which product is that. So that would basically filter out that brand, because in the previous variable we would actually get the sales amount, not the brand's name. And I can write all brands, and then I can write total sales is equal to brand with highest sales. So we have already received our max sales, and whenever the total sales is equivalent to the maximum sales of all those brands, then we will filter out that value, and we are going to use that value to inject into the filter context, and then we are going to retrieve the sales amount based on that. So let's create another variable, and I can name it as result equal to calculate total sales, and then I can write which product is that, and let's close our if statement. And if I have done everything correctly, so I need to specify the return part as well, and that would be basically result. So let's confirm the measure and see if it is working or not. So if I do not have any selection over the slicer, you can see that I get the same sales amount for each cell of that visual. And what we are basically doing is we are overwriting the filter, initial filter for each cell, but we do not want to do that. So what we can do is wrap our which product is that variable inside keep filters. So let's write keep filters, and that would basically create an intersection between the existing filter context and the one that we have created inside calculate using the variable. So you can see that if there is no selection over the slicer, only the brand with the highest sale is visible, which is Contoso. And if I select certain brands, you can see that those brands are not visible in that matrix, and everything except the selected brands gets visible in the matrix. So that was all for this video, and if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments section, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, have a great day.